Of residents are waiting to find out whether they'll be evicted. South Africa's main political parties have condemned escalating violence and deteriorating race relations at universities across the country. And the United Nations has carried out its first airdrop of humanitarian aid inside Syria. It says it is ready to launch a major relief effort. The Egyptian president has, for the first time, blamed terrorists for downing the Russian plane which crashed in Sinai last November, killing 224 people. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said the militants responsible for the attack were trying to sabotage the country's tourism industry and its relations with Russia. Moscow had previously said a bomb brought the jet down. The favourite to win Best Film at Sunday night's Oscars ceremony is Spotlight. It's based on the true story of the journalist who uncovered widespread child abuse within the Catholic Church in Boston. Our US correspondent Greg Milam met a victim who spoke out and some of the team which uncovered the scandal.
I was not an altar boy, but I was the newspaper boy. And the rector was one of my customers. He was there for only a year and a half, 18 months, and he was assaulting both myself and one of my childhood friends. Never ever occurred to me that there were other priests doing the same thing, never mind that the bishops would know about it.
It took Phil Saviano 25 years to tell his story, a story now at the heart of a movie expected to star at the Oscars. Spotlight reveals the Boston Globe's investigation into abuse by priests and the Catholic Church's efforts to cover it up.
What the film brings back for me mostly is not so much my childhood experiences, but that process of going through the 90s and talking to the news media and trying to get them to take a closer look at the issue. Not write about individual priests, but I always wanted them to go up another level.
When you're a poor kid from a poor family, and when a priest pays attention to you, it's a big deal. How do you say no to God?
And that scene in the film where I was talking to the Spotlight team, for me, is just, it's very emotional to see it because I remember that meeting so clearly.
Exposing the dark secrets of what had been going on for decades in Boston also exposed its tensions. Mark Ruffalo is nominated for Best Supporting Actor for playing reporter Mike Resende.
The victims have been really heartened by this movie. I mean, you got to understand that victims of clergy abuse, their stories, their truth was denied for decades and decades. Most of them believed that they were alone. Most of them believed that they were somehow at fault for what had happened to them. And initially our work showed them that there was a systemic problem and it was not their fault. And it liberated them to come forward and say, hey, look, this happened to me and it was wrong.
You think he's got something?
Rachel McAdams is also nominated for playing reporter Sasha Pfeiffer.
I hope it reminds people that this is why you should buy a newspaper, because that is the revenue that supports what we do. And if you don't have investigative teams doing this kind of work, you end up with institutions, whether they're governmental, nonprofit, religious, corporate, that are unquestioned, that don't have to be held to account. And that's the value of what investigative journalism is, and I think the movie makes a really clear case of that.
We now know the abuse wasn't confined to Boston, and questions remain over the Church's response.
People who were so hopeful about Pope Francis are starting to think, well, geez, maybe he's no better than his predecessors. It gives you the impression that the Church really devalues children and their vulnerability. It's a really big problem, and I don't see that the Vatican is anywhere near getting a grip on it.
Greg Milam, Sky News, Boston.
Here's Anna now with another look at this morning's papers.
Hello there, you're watching Sky News and the press preview. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the newspaper headlines with the Observer journalist and author Elizabeth Day and the City AM editor Christian May. Welcome to both of you, good to see you. So to the front pages then for tomorrow, police failings in Rotherham. Top of the Guardian's story list, it says the conduct of more than 50 officers now under investigation following the conviction of a gang of child sex abusers. Top story for the Times too, it blames corrupt police for fueling a culture of impunity in South Yorkshire. The Independent has a special report from Mosul in Iraq, where it says Islamic State have unleashed a new wave of brutality against the population under their control. The Eye says women are particularly vulnerable, with special punishments for those who don't cover up. The Financial Times leads again tomorrow on the proposed takeover of the London Stock Exchange by German group Deutsche Börse. It says if the deal goes ahead, the merged group would be based in London. The Metro reports that Google is facing a £1.3 billion tax bill from French authorities, which is 10 times what the UK got from the tech giant. The Telegraph claims the Justice Secretary Michael Gove is facing the sack over his decision to oppose the PM's campaign to remain in the EU. There's a warning from the EU's border chief in the Daily Mail, who says 1 million more migrants will arrive in Europe this year. While the Express says France are threatening to tear up an historic border treaty and scrap checks if Britain votes to leave. The Sun speaks to former BBC presenter in his first interview since being released from jail. Stuart Hall there. And the Brit Awards make the Star's front page, where Adele has picked up multiple awards. So let's talk more with Elizabeth Day and Christian May. May Day, as you are sort of calling yourselves, or not, as the case may be. And some extraordinary reporting you want to herald in The Times from their chief investigative reporter.
Yes, Andrew Norfolk at The Times has been on this story for at least 5 years or more, and it is worth remembering that were it not for that reporting, none of these convictions would have come about. And indeed, so many shocking revelations from this town and others would simply not have seen the light of day. And many other newspapers pick up on it. I think what they're focusing on is the level of collusion among police officers. Alleged collusion among police officers, which ranges from sort of incompetence and a lack of compassion at one end, all the way through to alleged orchestrated corruption and cover-up at the other end. And the failings have been extraordinary. And indeed, the court has heard very detailed and harrowing stories of a willful desire to cover up or not investigate, not look too closely at a lot of the crimes that were alleged and indeed have been found to be evidence.
And the reasons for that was what, a fear
well, there were
of accusations
I think there were two
racism,
reasons. One of which Elizabeth was raising earlier, is that a lot of the victims just simply weren't believed because they were vulnerable, because they were disadvantaged in particular, and they weren't taken seriously. But another more insidious reason is that at a very organised institutional level, in local government in particular, there was, and it's been all set out in black and white in this report and others, there was a very specific decision was taken not to look at certain sections of the community, in the Asian community, who've been largely responsible for a lot of these crimes, for fear of setting off tensions within the community. And these decisions have been widely documented and rightly now condemned widely.
And according to this Times report as well, the courts heard that one officer allegedly had sex with underage girls who were passed around by the brothers, and so they were obviously involved in it in a more serious way than sort of corruption, collusion and turning a blind eye. They were physically involved in it. And one of the most distressing aspects of this case is that 2 women were also involved, one of whom, Karen McGregor, was seen as a sort of maternal figure to a lot of these lost girls, and under the masquerade of providing a sort of charitable enterprise where she was taking in girls and looking after them, she was actually selling them to the highest bidder, and it was a cover for prostitution. And you just do think, you know,